Speaking of getting along.
Oh yeah, see, like, why can't we be like
good job, Brad?
Intel
Good job.
and AMD?
Good man.
Right?
Yes.
They got out.
Yes,
They got out some bongos. They started singing some songs of getting together, and the bombshell news, which was a bombshell, is
a bombshell.
Super surprising.
Yeah.
Super surprising.
My jaw literally dropped, actually. Like, I was like, what? Like, that doesn't
I
happen
knew
often.
something was coming. I mean, clearly, because, I wrote a story earlier this year saying, there's, because give him credit, Kyle at Hard OCP was saying, there's some big AMD deal in the works with Intel. It didn't quite work out to the scale that I really, Kyle was saying it was going to be. So to me, it wasn't as big a deal. Interestingly, it was a big deal for a lot of people who wouldn't expect it because Intel and AMD hate each other, right? But Intel, for people who don't know, they're going to be buying an AMD graphics part and integrating it with an upcoming mobile chip.
And HBM.
Yes,
So
HBM too.
an Intel chip with HBM and a Radeon GPU.
Yeah, but I mean, so the full details are, well, of course, nobody really knows the full details, but it's going to be used with an upcoming Intel H part, which, is what's in this laptop here, an H part Kaby Lake, quad core, 45 watts, typically hotter, and they're taking a unknown Vega part with HBM2.
I wouldn't assume that.
Nope.
No, some of the early leaks are looking like there are some early benchmark leaks, and it looks like the core configuration, if they're accurate, could be Polaris. Who knows?
Well, why would you?
I mean, that makes kind of more sense to me just because of how much heat Vega's been throwing off.
Yeah, but I didn't know there was an HBM2 memory controller in Polaris, though. What are they doing, like a redesign?
Well, that's the
part
thing.
system?
This is like a semi-custom part for Intel, just like the custom parts that AMD makes for Xbox and Sony PlayStation. So anything's possible.
Okay, everything is possible, Brad. I assume it's not as revolutionary as we think it is. I'm assuming that what they're doing is they're buying a Vega part, probably a Vega 56 level kind of like performance, with an HBM2 stack, 8 gigs, right? And they integrate that on their really super cool EMIB stuff. Who don't know, Intel talked about it earlier this year. It lets them basically connect up a bunch of different chips on this super fast fabric and make little tiny packages. And it's going to be, tiny. The motherboard in this laptop is probably about this big, and the motherboard or the GPU and CPU package in this upcoming piece could be like super tiny. So
the thing that interests me about that, just kind of a tangent, is they were saying it'd fit into thinner, lighter laptops, right? Gaming graphics. But when you reduce the board size like that, I get the lighter, but I don't get the thinner because it's still the same thickness as a motherboard.
Well, one thing they can do is, you don't have the motherboard. If, say, a typical, CPU and GPU package is maybe about, that big, and you shrink it down to this. Ideally, I guess you could add more cooling, right? So you've got more space to add more cooling. If you didn't have the little tiny package, that cooling would still take up extra space. So you could either make it thinner with the same cooling, or you could, possibly add more cooling so it runs faster than other similarly sized laptops. So
we have a comment on YouTube. Lord Wan Fu says it doesn't seem economically feasible to design an HBM controller to be paired with a Polaris part. What do you guys think of that?
Depends how much Intel's paying AMD.
Yeah, but
I have conspiracy theories. We can get into those later. I think that these chips were asked for by Apple, and Apple is basically the only ones who could get Intel and AMD to work together on something like this. So,
yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
That's actually a really good point to bring up, because my biggest question after reading all of this news was, what would the application of this chip really be? Like actually in realistic, real world setting, because they're talking about putting them into thin and light laptops like this, but most 15-inch laptops that have those H parts are going to be using discrete graphics. We really haven't seen many laptops at all that have an H part that don't also have discrete graphics. So I'm not sure why you would want, that much extra firepower for your integrated graphics.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it's not really integrated. It is
Well, okay, sorry.
discrete, right? It's on the package.
But it's still not true discrete graphics.
Yeah. Well, I
The
mean,
interesting part to me is that
It's gonna
it
be
still
limited.
has the integrated graphics in the Intel chip too, so it has both graphics.
right. And so that's why I don't think it's as revolutionary as was said earlier this year. The reason when I reported on it earlier this year, Kyle was saying basically Intel was going to license AMD IP and then dump the entire Intel graphics team. That, of course, still could happen. But this is really, it's really like taking all of the parts in a laptop similar to this is Gigabyte's Aero 15X with an H part and a GeForce GTX 1070 Max Q. Right.
Oh, that's 1070.
Yeah, so 1070 Max Q, but you shrink it. Of course, 1070 Max Q is probably beyond what this AMD part is, I'm guessing, but it just makes it a lot smaller. I mean, could you really shave that much? The concept, if you go to PC World's webpage, you know, we're always going to push our own story, but if you go to our page, I think it's the only place that I've seen it, but there is a concept laptop that Mark Hochman grabbed a shot of, and it shows spectacularly thin laptop, you know, with you know, discrete graphics. Yeah, I mean and as far as the conspiracy theory you're talking about, Brad, I really do think there is some if this does not show up in the next MacBook Pro 15, I would be surprised because it's perfect. It's so right up Apple's alley, right? They like miniaturization, they like thinness, kind of plays to what they do.
It seems like they hate NVIDIA ever since Bumpgate. Once all that Bumpgate happened and they kind of chucked Apple on the fire, they haven't seen NVIDIA parts inside of an Apple machine since then.
Yeah,
So,
but you know,
long
NVIDIA
time.
ended up paying for that. I mean, they paid for everybody. For people who don't know, there was a line of notebook GPUs that the solder went bad on apparently, and it affected everyone. Dell, Apple, blah blah. Everyone who had these things, you would just be using them, and one day the GPU would just quit, and it wasn't coming back. So people don't like that, but of course, people don't. Apple has made plenty of screw ups. As much as their fans pretend nothing ever goes wrong, you've had white bumps show up on the screen. You've had keyboards failing because a piece of dust gets in them. They've had just tons and tons of failures too. So I can't see that being the reason for pushing NVIDIA, you know, overboard.
Awfully coincidental.
Yeah, but in fact, I know somebody in the industry who's just like, God, this is going to go in the MacBook Pro 15, right? It's like, yeah, I was saying it's got to be, right? Totally. I would expect it. I don't know. But, you know, again, it's not that revolutionary because all it really is instead of a discrete GPU sitting, you know, next to the CPU, you have it all in one little tiny chip that's like that big. And with what I think it's probably a single stack, so an 8 gig HBM2 stack.
It depends on what they want. It could be less. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 4 for something like this.
I would think 8 though. Why go all that length to do this and then do 4 gig? And then I that's why I don't believe the Polaris thing. I know people are saying it's Polaris. I don't think so. I think this is a Vega 56 mobile part. I just don't see it.
Also, the chat is saying they think the difference between calling it integrated and discrete is the number of compute units. Specifically, Jacob Flores says 24 Polaris C compute units is pretty significant, much more than integrated.
Well, it's not performance that integrated versus discrete is. I think that the formal definition is not based on performance.
No? Oh, okay.
But what is 20? It is 24 CUs, right? For this part, I think they're saying.
That's what the leaks say. They
we don't
haven't officially said any hard details. They haven't told us how many CUs are in it. They haven't told us HBM details. Nothing like that.
What's
Just
Sorry, I was going to say Jacob also says the leaked benchmarks was 4 gig HBM2.
Yeah, I don't know.
that makes sense to me. If you're targeting 1080p, it depends. It depends. I mean, it still is not integrated, but kind of integrated graphics. They only have so much room and space to put in there. So
Right.
What? How many CUs in a 56 in a Vega 56 core?
I
wait,
don't
56,
know off
right?
the top
Isn't
that
Brr.
How many lines of resolution in 1080p?
Yeah. So
It is Friday.
yeah, it is Friday. Okay, I don't know. But you know, of course, it's crazy because this is that people never expected this, right? So you guys are shocked, I guess.
Well, I'm shocked at it actually happening. I wasn't, since those rumors came around last year, I had faith that the people who were reporting them, because both Kyle and Fudo over at Fudzilla were reporting it. And I'm like, those guys usually know, they got people on the inside and they know their stuff. But when it happened, it was still like, wow, there's going to be an Intel CPU with a Radeon GPU. And that's wild.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where when you hear it, you don't necessarily think whoever's reporting it, especially in this particular case with the sources being as good as they are, you don't necessarily think that it's erroneous. But I mean, how many times do you say things like, hey, we should get together sometime, you know, like we should like do that thing we keep talking about, and then it never comes to pass, right? I just kind of figured it was one of those things.
Yeah. I mean, there was a good chance it was going to go nowhere, right?
Something that interests me is I'm reading Mark's article, and it says Intel says that it'll move gaming class graphics down from systems that are 26 millimeters thick to thin and light PCs at 16 and maybe even 11 millimeters thick.
Ooh.
11 millimeters is small. But I noticed how they neglected to mention NVIDIA's Max-Q technology there, which is putting GTX, like that one right there, GTX 1070 in about 18 millimeter thick things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I should have brought in the Asus Zephyrus, right? Because that thing is just stupidly thin, and that's really GTX 1075 performance, right? So, yeah, I don't know. That is, I'm not sure where they're going with this, honestly. I mean, it'll be cool and all this, but the other thing at the other point, I do wonder, like, so if this is a part they're buying for, or they're making for Apple, are they going to sell this to Dell and HP, or is this just going to...
Their terminology in the release, they put up a blog post about it, said devices around the turn of the year, the first quarter or whatever. So the S on there makes me think it'll pop up in more than one. But we'll see. One thing that's interesting to me is that AMD is going to supply Intel with graphics drivers for games and stuff, but it'll actually be Intel pushing out the driver package to users. You won't be dealing with AMD directly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's weird, because I mean, if it is classically the system sees it as a discrete GPU, then you should be able to just install your own drivers, you would think.
Yeah, but that's not what's going to happen. It's going to be the one driver chip package from Intel pushed to you.
Oh, God.
So.
That is bad. I mean, that is like... I mean, Intel drivers for games have sort of like... I like when people like give AMD a hard time for like, oh, your drivers are terrible. Yeah, well, they're not as bad as Intel's. Yeah, that's true. You got a fair point. Well, I will leave you alone now. Because they were just like... Yeah.
They said they're going to work with the Radeon Group to supply day one drivers for new games. So they're aware of that fact, at least it sounds like.
And actually, apparently that's really easy too, right? That's like a very easy thing for Intel to do now at this point.
Drivers?
To
work
contact
with,
the Radeon Group.
Oh,
I sense another segue.